alaikum. This presentation is about intercultural communication with more specific focus on the Arab Islamic culture and more specifically on the Gulf area. And then at the end of the presentation, there is also applications in a hospital setting. Now, the information provided in this presentation is based on what the sociologists and social anthropologists have put forward in relation to cultural dimensions, as put forward by Hofstede and Hall, and also related to life experiences. Now, when a person comes to the Gulf area, they quickly see that this culture is different, whether it's how people are dressed, the men and women, how people greet each other, they put the noses, they put each other's, against each other's noses, and also the way they eat, what the food is like. Also, if you look at the art is really also different. You see the Arabic language. This is a poem that is shaped in the shape of a horse, and then on the left lower side there is a flower, but that flower also has one of God's attributes written in it. So you see calligraphy, as is this picture as well. The calligraphy is really an important form of the arts, and it also expresses the Arabic language and the Islamic dimension. So these two dimensions permeates the Arab culture, specifically in the Gulf. You can see it in the decoration at the mosques on the right, where we don't have images at the mosques. This is also an effect of the Islamic practices. The mosques are decorated by calligraphy, and it's verses from the Quran, the Holy Book, and their left is a greeting card, where it's also you see the Arabic and the minarets and the mosques. Now, the other thing is people that they notice when they come to this part of the world is the 5 times call for prayers. Now, this is in Mecca, in Saudi Arabia, and then you see this is a mosque also where people pray 5 times a day, and it's also the place where people go for pilgrimage. Now, when the call for prayer comes, everybody has to answer that prayer call, and then wherever you are, they take out the mat or without a mat, or they do the ablution, and then they also do their prayers. And children are encouraged at a very young age, and they want to imitate the elders and do their prayers. And so all of these, what I have mentioned, is part of the culture that you observe when you come to this part of the world. Now, when social anthropologists and sociologists talk about cultures, they use the iceberg model. The iceberg model says that a culture is like an iceberg. There's an observable part of the culture, and this is all the pictures that I have shown you is an observable part of the culture, and it is dependent and carried by a submerged part of the culture, which carries the most weight of this culture. Now, if I limit this presentation to the observable part of the culture, why people are dressed this way, what do you do, what you say in the situation, what you don't say, it is a nice practical presentation, but at the same time it limits your skills, so that when you find yourself in a situation that we haven't discussed, then it'll be hard for you to figure out how to behave. And so I would rather do this. I would rather give you some insight about the submerged part of the culture, because that is the part that forms the context of the Arab Islamic culture, and it actually is the basis for the do's and don'ts, which we will allude to during the presentation. Now, what type of, or what context, what part of the context am I going to talk about? Now, these are the two cultures, like an Arab culture and an expat culture. Now, the observable part of the culture are the words, actions, and dress. Now, the Arab is going to explain your behavior, your words, action, and dress according to his context. That's only normal. And so he's going to fall into misunderstanding. And for you, it's also the same. You're going to explain his words, actions, and dress according to your context, and you will fall into misunderstanding. So what I'm trying to do here is trying to enlighten both of these cultures about each other's context. And by doing that, I'm going to talk about cultural dimensions. These are patterns that have been put forward by Hofstede and Hall, and they describe patterns that exist in all cultures. All cultures value relationship. All cultures have communication style, and so on. But I put them in different color. Why? Because the way these cultural patterns manifest themselves in each culture is different. and this is what leads to misunderstandings. We need to understand the dimensions, and then we need to understand how they can be differently manifested in each culture. When we do that, then we minimize misunderstandings between cultures, and we provide ourselves with skills that will help us to interpret any cultural situations that we find ourselves in. Now, these are the 4 cultural dimensions. I want to lay out the framework for this presentation. Now, I'm going to talk about the 4 cultural dimensions first in general, and what I say in this part of the presentation will apply to all cultures, not specifically the Arab culture, but all cultures. And then, and I mentioned these 2 dimensions, the Arab traditions and Islamic practices, and then I'm going to take these 4 dimensions and then see how they manifest themselves through these 2 filters, how we see all these 4 dimensions in the Arab Islamic cultures. This is the second part of the presentation, and then the third part of this presentation at the end, I'm going to give you examples of how we see these 4 dimensions presenting themselves in a hospital setting. Before I start with the 4 dimensions, I just want to draw your attention to 2 things. When we talk about cultures, we tend to generalize. We tend to say that Arabs communicate this way, Americans communicate this way. We tend to generalize to understand the main idea, to understand the main differences. It is easier to understand the 2 poles than to explain and understand the continuum that lies between them. And so we tend to generalize, but when we tend to deal with an individual, we have to avoid generalization, because if we generalize at the individual level, we're going to go into stereotyping. We're going to put that person we're dealing with in a box and deal with them accordingly, and this will create misunderstandings. So generalization is acceptable when we talk about cultures, but when we go down to the individual level, it is not advisable. All these people can be called Arabs, and all of them can be called Muslims. So what I'm trying to say is that the Arab Muslim world is very diverse, and we need to keep an open mind when we deal with individuals. Now, the other thing I want to draw your attention to is talk a little bit about these 2 important factors that permeate the culture. The first one is Islamic practices. Now, if I say Islam is a religion, I don't really mean the definition of religion that says my spiritual relationship with God. Islam is not like that. It's a way of life. Okay, as you've seen in the pictures, it affects all aspects of life. It affects the arts, it affects the food, it affects how people dress, and so on. But in the Arab Muslim world, you will find people anywhere on this range. This is a range from 0 practicing to most practicing. You will find people anywhere on this range, and where they are on this range actually affects how much these Islamic practices will be seen in the observable part of the culture, how much it will affect the way they dress, the way they speak, what they eat and drink, and so on. Now, the other dimension are the Arab traditions, and I put at the other end modernity, westernization, globalization. This is also a range. You will find people anywhere on this range. So as a result, you will find people anywhere in this field in the Arab world. With more conservative cultures like Saudi Arabia and Qatar, you will find people more of Arab traditionalist and more practicing on the right lower part of the field. And of course, depending on the age affects the age of a person you're dealing with, affects where they are in this range. Also, if they're being Arab expats from another country, from another Arab country, also affects where they are in this field. Now I want to talk about relationships, the first dimension of the cultural dimensions. What do we mean by relation? Now, this has been put forward by Hofstede, and he has more cultures than what I have listed here. You can go back to his book or a blog or a website he has, and it is all in the reference slide at the end. So what do we mean by that? Collectivism, individualism. This is a range also. Some cultures are more collectivist than other cultures. Arabs are more collectivist than Japanese, but Japanese are more collectivist than Americans, and so on. So it's a range. Now, I'm going to talk more about collectivist culture because that's where the Arabs are. And the more you are on the opposite end in this spectrum, the more chance for you to go into misunderstanding with the Arabs. Now, what do we mean by collectivism and individualism? What we mean is the relationship between the individual and the group. How is it in a collectivist society and how is it in an individualistic society? Now, if I want to really simplify the matter, I would say in a collectivist society, imagine a nuclear family. What would be obligations and duties and dependence and interdependence and all of that in a nuclear family? That also exists in individualistic cultures. But the difference is in collectivist culture, you go expand this nuclear family to include everybody in that culture. This is more like a collectivist culture. In individualistic culture, you depend on your mother, you have a specific relationship with her, and so on. But that also exists in collectivist culture with all the culture, everybody in the culture. And so collectivist culture, the person is born already in a group that he belongs to, and the network of interactions and relationship has already been established and put to him before he is born. Okay, and he is continuously for the rest of his life has to deal with these interactions and his obligations and duties and dependence and loyalties and so on. This is not the case in individualistic cultures. You're born into your immediate family, but then you're supposed to grow, and then you make your own relationship, you depend on yourself, and so on. So I'm going to explain this collectivism, individualism. We're talking about four major factors here. There's more if you go back to Hofstede book. So the identity of a person living in a collectivist culture is a we identity. It's not an I identity as in individualistic cultures. In collectivist culture, it's the group that I belong to. The group gives me the identity. So I am the son of this, the son of this, the son of this, belonging to this tribe. This is my identity. In more individualistic culture, I make my identity as I grow. And this is a big difference. Now, so because of this, because this group forms my identity, relationships are very important. If you just go out from this presentation with the focus on the importance of relationships in a collectivist culture, then that would really help you out in weighing every interaction that you do. Relationships take precedence before work commitments, before achievements. And there's a lot of interdependence. It's like a big family. So I do this for you, you do this for me, and also it affects decision making. Okay, decision making in collectivist cultures is made by consultation. Why? Because the group that I belong to is affected by my decision because it is part of my identity. So if I want to make a major decision, then I consult with them, because whatever I do, the consequences will affect all of them. If it is good consequences, it will lift everybody up with me. If it is bad consequences, dishonors me, then it dishonors the whole group and takes the whole group down with me. But if I consulted with them, then they're there to bear with me the consequences. And this is different than individualistic cultures, where I'm the one who makes the decisions and I'm the one who bears by myself the consequences. So this is just a quick explanation what collectivism and individualism mean. Now let's talk about communication style. Communication style is also different between cultures. This is put forward by Hall. He said that some cultures are high context cultures in comparison with other cultures that are low context. He found there's a relationship between collectivist cultures and being high context cultures. And Arabs are high context in comparison with French, and French are high context in comparison with Americans. Now, what do we mean by this? As Lerner had put it, communication is like a dance, okay? And in high context style of communication, what it means is that the dance is more important than the words. So the whole package of communication in high context cultures and in usually collectivist culture, then what I am saying is not as important as the way I am saying it, the use of silence, the tone of the voice, the body language, the relationship between the two. All of this, the situation I am in, all of this affects the actual message. In more low context, individualistic cultures, it's exactly what I say, not the whole package. So you can see from this how much miscommunication can happen and misunderstandings. So I'm also going to explain this now with a few examples. For example, in high context cultures and collectivist cultures, the weight is on the listener. Okay, so if I am from a high context culture, I am going to talk to you, to communicate with you with a dance. And so the weight is on you to analyze and read between the lines and put everything into perspective. What I'm trying to communicate to you might actually be the opposite of my words. That can happen a lot. And in individualistic cultures, which are low context, the weight is on the speaker. You have to say it. If you didn't say it, don't expect me to know it. And so you can see where misunderstandings can happen. If I want to put it in simple words, high context communication is more like family communication, okay? Even in nuclear families, the mother sometimes doesn't have to say a word. She can just have a look at the child in a certain way. The child knows. So that is the style of communication that is called high context. Individualistic cultures, this might be only in the nuclear family, but in collectivist culture, this permeates the whole culture. They all understand the dance, the steps of the dance, and they reciprocate with what should be the complementing steps of the dance. Now, this also affects, because high context cultures are usually collectivist cultures and they value relationship. We go back to the importance of relationships. Then their style of communication has to support that, and so it's usually an indirect style of communication. So if there's any conflict, if I say hi to somebody and he doesn't answer, then I will not tell him what's wrong. I will go to another person who is also valued by the one who didn't answer me and tell him, can you go please check with him why he didn't answer me, or why didn't she answer me? And so there's use of intermediaries in these cultures because they don't want to have a confrontation. They avoid confrontations. Why? Because they can break relationships. We go back now to how important relationships are. And so the style of communication has to support the importance of relationship in collectivist cultures. And so also the fact that saving face. I may not tell you yes or no directly because I want to save your face. If you invite me out for pizza and I don't really want to go for pizza, but you have been kind enough to invite me out for pizza, so I have to save your face. I can't be direct in telling you no, and so I have to dance a dance, being indirect, telling you in a way that I don't really want to go. But if you're not from my culture, you don't know the steps of the dance, you won't get the message, and you will misunderstand me, and you will end up waiting for me, and I don't show up, and then you have all kinds of conclusions based on that for my actions. And so this is briefly about communication style between cultures. What about the use of time and space? Now, the use of time and space, Hall has talked about this, and he divided cultures between two. The polychronic cultures are usually collectivist cultures, are usually high context style of communication, and these are the cultures that do more than one thing at the same time. You come into the manager, he's entertaining somebody, he's answering the phone, he still has a meeting with you, he's writing something down, all of these at the same time. And this is not the case in monochronic cultures. Okay, monochronic cultures believe in having slots of time, schedules. From this time to this time I'm doing this, from this time to this time I'm doing this. Now, where does the problem happen? The problem happens is when, for example, somebody who's monochronic asks somebody who's polychronic, come please, I want to see you at 5. And so he makes a schedule, so he's not doing anything at 5. And then at 5, polychronic gets a message or something from his mother or his sister or something that he has to come and see her. And so he goes because, as I said, relationships takes precedence, especially with family. And so he goes there and he doesn't show up at 5. And so to you, he has ruined your schedule. But if we flip this, and then we say the polychronic asks the monochronic to come over at 5 because he needs to talk to him, he will be having 2-3 other things doing at the same time. So if the monochronic phones up and says, I'm sorry, I'm not coming at 5, or he has an accident or something and he doesn't show up at 5, the polychronic is fine with him because he has 2-3 other things doing at the same time, so it doesn't really affect him. So he can reschedule any time. So the polychronic are more flexible in their time use of time, and the monochronic are less flexible because it is based on the schedule. Now, I'm not favoring any style, I'm just saying that there are two different styles, and the clash happens when people from different styles interact and they don't understand the differences between the styles. Now, I put here Arabs, but it's actually collectivist cultures. Now, the use of space, what is that? Space is the personal bubble around us and what we call ours. And if you can go now with the logic, if it's a collectivist culture, you value relationship, then my personal bubble is going to be very small. What I call mine is very small. And so there's a lot of sharing. I'm using this pen, I've been sitting on this chair for a week. It doesn't mean that you have to come and take my permission to take that chair and sit on it. Okay, and so what I call mine, sometimes this is my pen, my ruler, my pen, my eraser or something, but you don't have to take my permission. People will come and take it. This is just a ruler, this is just a pen. This has no value if you compare it to relationships and so on. And this is not the case in more individualistic cultures. Now, the last dimension I want to talk about is high power distance. Now, this is how people relate to power, okay? How the boss looks at the people under the boss and so forth. And so this is also a list. This is put forward by Hofstede, and this is also a list of some of the cultures. Usually, people who are collectivist are usually high context style of communication, are usually polychronic, and are usually high power distance. And you can have problems if you're dealing with people in low power distance. Now, what does this mean? Also, a few things to explain it. It means that the boss has the power. The centralization of power, there's no delegation of power, which means if there's any problem arises because there's no delegation of power, the people under the boss expects the boss to deal with it, so everybody goes back to the boss. He has to deal and solve the problem. There's a lot of dependence on the boss. There's no consultation. The boss does not consult people under him. People under him do not give advice to the boss. They don't feel comfortable giving advice to the boss. He might be a weak boss if he asks for advice. And so this is very quickly about power distance. So these are in general, these are the 4 dimensions. Now, this part of the presentation can apply to all cultures. Now, I'm going to take these 4 dimensions and mention how they can be seen in the Arabic Islamic filters. Now, this is the second part of the presentation. Now, I have put forward myself 2 models. People can agree or disagree with them, describing the collectivism, the type of relationships from an Arabic model and an Islamic model. Now, this is the Arabic model. The way I see it is that to an Arab, there's the blood relationship. There's a blood relationship that is the strongest kind of relationship. Of course, there's the parents and the siblings, and then there is the blood relatives, the cousins, the uncles, the aunts on both sides, and so on. And then after that, there is the circle of a relationship not by blood, but by tribe, and then the other tribes, and then the country, and then there's the circle of other Arab countries, and then there's the circle of other Muslim and Arab countries, and then there's the rest of the world, and so on. So it is circles. And so what I wanted to say is that in the Arab world, you take the kind of relationships, responsibilities, obligations, duties that exist within a nuclear family, and then you expand that to cover all these circles that I talked about, but in a waning effect, with a waning effect. And so a lot is expected from the circles that are close to one's self, and so more acceptance is expected, more obligations, more protection is given by people who are in these circles, and more duties and loyalties is given to them, and it gets less as people fall in the outside circles. Now, where do you see this playing is that, for example, let's say I want to vote, and if I'm voting for somebody, I don't have anybody running who is from my immediate circles, and so I'm voting at this time of people who are more qualified for this position. But let's assume somebody from my inner circle comes and runs for the position, and then I will shift, my loyalty will shift, and I will vote for that person irrespective of his qualification for the job. Now, people might be shocked on what happened here, but what happened is that the situation changed, and so I have to give my loyalty now to people in that circle. If I don't, now everybody in my circles will be, what shame did you bring? How come you didn't vote for that person? And so it is affecting the group that I belong to, my identity, what I have to live with for the rest of my life. I have to interact with these people, and so if I don't vote for that person, then I have to bear the consequences for the rest of my life. And this is why I changed my vote. Now, some people would matter to them, but I'm just saying this is a general thing. Now, I don't want to talk too much about that, except to say that also a type of collectivism is the tribalism. Tribalism is saying that one family is better than another family. And this is, you can find this, and you can find it more with people who are on the range closer to Arab traditions. Now, the Islamic model in general, and there are actually there is another recording about this, specifically about these two models, a shorter one on YouTube. Now, this one is the Islamic model. Islam also values collectivism, certain relationships. For example, in Islam, it is said in the Quran the importance of the relationship with the mother. The mother is very, very important and is highly regarded in Islam, because it's in the Quran that says the mother bore the child upon hardship, and she breastfed him and she took care of him. And so respect and care should be given to the mother and to both father and mother. It is said, the verses in the Quran, that the children should not be disrespectful to their parents, not even with something like rolling the eyes to their parents. The parents come after God and the Prophet. So it's very important to the relationship. Even one of the companions of the Prophet asked the Prophet once, who should have the best of my companionship? And he said, your mother. And he said, then who? He said, then your mother. He said, then who? He said, your mother. The fourth time he said, who? He said, your father. And so both of them are very, very important to the relationship. And hence the precedence also goes to relationship, especially with the parents, and of course comes after that the siblings. So the blood relationship, you have the circle of blood relationship. There's duties and obligations that goes forth back and forth between these people in these circles. This is proximity by blood. Now then you have proximity by they're not they're relatives and so on, and you have duties and obligations, but you also have proximity, physical proximity, neighbors. There's a lot of obligations and duties actually that should be established with neighbors, especially neighbors that are close by. Even the Prophet's companions thought that the Prophet is going to say that the neighbor inherits you, from how much the Prophet was emphasizing about the relationships, duties and obligations to neighbors. So if you're living close to people who are practicing Muslims, you might have them knocking on your door, how are you, giving you some food, kind of thing. And so because they have to maintain these relationships. Now I want to emphasize that in the Arabic model, their identity, because they belong to this group, these circles establish their identity. But in the Islamic model, the identity is my identity is because I belong to God, not to these groups. So I deal with these groups, with these social circles, according what pleases God. So I am dealing with my relatives, I am dealing with my parents, I am dealing with everybody in these circles with the obligations and duties that were ordained by God. And so this is my neighbors. And then you have proximity by spiritual proximity, those people who share with me the faith or share other faiths with me, and they believe in God. So there are certain also obligations and duties towards them. Then there is the proximity by humanity. So everybody else who is a human, I have obligations and duties and certain responsibilities towards them. And then of course there is the other, the animals, the planet, the environment. I also have obligations and duties towards that. And then there is something called situational proximity, which is also people that I deal with them in certain situations. If I am working now with somebody, then there are certain etiquettes, mannerism, obligations that I have to interact with that person in a different way. And then if that person is my teacher, there's also a different mannerism and ways of behavior that is expected in that relationship. Doctor, patient, any kind of relationship, situational relationship has its own mannerism, in addition to the what I mentioned before. And so Islam values relationships. And also there's a vertical dimension to this, is that the more I want to get closer to God, the more I want to excel in these relationships. And there's more explanation about it in the other recording. And so this is the dimension, the Islamic dimension, the way I see it. And also I wanted to say is that it can support the Arabic model, and it can contradict with the Arabic, or clash with the Arabic model. If you talk about tribalism, Islam does not accept tribalism, that some people are better than others. In the Quran it said, God says that I created you from, O people, I created you from man and a female, from a male and a female, so that you become nations and tribes, so that you get to know one another, so that the best of you are the most righteous. So righteousness determines who is better than who, but not race or tribe or anything like that. Now this is what I wanted to say about part, I don't want to talk too much, but this is part of how collectivism can manifest itself, the importance of relationship from an Arabic and from an Islamic perspective. Now what about the style of communication? We said that the Arabs have a high context style of communication that is also supported by the Arabic language. This is calligraphy, as I mentioned, and the Arabic language has been described as being a flowery language. Okay, it has a lot of exaggerations, over assertions, repetitions, storytelling, very flowery language. So it is, the packaging is also supported in this language. Now one thing I wanted to say is, I want to tell you a story first, that this happened, people who were living in Canada. I was visiting my friend, and she had her brother visiting for her for the first time from an Arab country, and we had a Canadian person coming delivering some papers for her husband. And so her brother went to the door. This is the first contact for him with a Canadian, and so he took the papers, and then he said, he translated exactly what he would say in that Arab country. So he said, thank you very much, you really troubled yourself, you shouldn't have done that, we really appreciate what you have done, why don't you come in for tea, it will be very nice, and so on. And so the Canadian said, okay, I'll come in for tea. And then he came in for tea, and then after he left, the brother was saying, why did he come in for tea? He should have understood I didn't literally mean come in for tea. Now this is the problem. Now there's one book that I forgot the author of. She said that English-speaking people communicate to relay information, while Arabs, and this is the important part, is Arabs communicate to relay an emotional experience. Now this sentence explains everything, because it explains, if I'm going to relay not information, I want to tell you how I feel about it, then I can't tell you how I feel about it unless I exaggerate, I dramatize, I say all these kind of things. Then if I don't, then my feelings is not really that much. If I say thank you, if I say thank you so much, you really shouldn't have done this, come in for tea and stuff like that, then I really mean it, then I'm really happy. But if I say thank you, I'm not really happy. Okay, and this is how it's going to be understood. So I have to really dramatize and say how I feel about it, and this is the emotional experience. And so when he said come in for tea, he didn't literally mean come in for tea. He meant that you are so much welcome that sometimes in the future, you're really welcome to come in for tea at some point, But so we don't take it literally. Why? Because it can be used, dramatization and all this over exaggerations, to relay how I feel, not necessarily meaning every word. So you can understand where misunderstandings can happen here. Now, as I said, the importance of the language, the Arabs really take pride in the Arabic language. It is said in English, and I don't remember also where I read that, is that not every English-speaking person is an Englishman, but yes, every Arab-speaking person is an Arab. And so the Arabic language determines the identity. And so they're very proud of it. They're very proud of the poetry. It is said that the Bedouin has two weapons. One is his sword, and the other is having a poet in that tribe, because he can take up and put down tribes with just his poetry. And so they have, for example, in the Gulf, they have $1 million poet competitions, and then they recite poetry, and then it's very even in the newspapers every day they publish poetry in the Gulf area. And so also the language of the faith itself, it's the language of the Quran is Arabic, so everybody is supposed to learn some kind of Arabic if he's becoming a Muslim, just to do the prayers. Now, one thing I wanted to really to point out is this can happen in all languages and not just in the Arabic language, is the literal translations. Even if you say, okay, Jude is speaking good English, but sometimes if I'm speaking too much now, even presenting this presentation, sometimes the brain brings forward literal translations of words, and sometimes they can be out of context. For example, there's a story, one of the principals, I give these presentations at international schools, and this one principal was complaining about a parent, and she's telling me, well, she was a very strong-willed lady, and so she was upset from a parent. He said, I'm nervous. And I said, were you upset? And she said, yeah, I was mad from something. And then he said, why are you nervous? And then I smiled and I said, this is what he said. He said, why are you upset? Why are you upset? Why are you mad? He said, he said, why I'm nervous. I said, his mind literally translated a word in Arabic that is asabi, has something to do with the nervous system. So it can be literally translated into nervous, but he didn't really mean the English understanding of the nervous. And so it can happen in any language. So before we go into judgment and misjudge people, please ascertain that this is actually what they mean by putting it in another way before we judge each other. This is some of the words that you might hear, inshallah. Inshallah is an abused term. The way I see it is it's an abused term. What it really means is God willing. God willing, I will come. Can you come? Are you coming for tea? Yes, God willing, I will come for tea. If it is used by a practicing Muslim, it's actually invoking or asking God's helping him to come for tea. Because it is in the Quran that don't say that you will do anything without saying inshallah, God willing. Why? Because it puts the human in the proper perspective in relationship to God. It humbles us that yes, we have the intention, we do it, but it actually happening, materializing, it depends on God's will, and we cannot change that. And so this is what it's supposed to be. And so a practicing Muslim would say it with the intention that he's coming, and he's just saying that because God asked him to, and he's depending on God. But because of the indirect style of communication and the high context style of communication, and to preserve relationships, people use and abuse this word. For example, somebody told me the story that he invited somebody for pizza, invited an Arab for pizza. And so the Arab said over the phone, he said, yes, I'm coming. And then he said something about his wife. He has to do this. And then he said something about his son, he has to do this. And then at the end, they said, inshallah, I'll come. And so this is a problem. He didn't show up, and he's not coming. And so what he said is his style of communication is, I want to say no, but we go back now to what we have learned. He's not going to say no directly because he has to save your face. You've been so nice to invite him for pizza, so he can't say no. But he has to tell you in a way that he can't come. So he's dancing the dance. So he's telling you, my wife has to do this, of course, which means that I have to help her with this, and my son has to do this, which means I have to help him with this. And then at the end, I'm saying inshallah, and they use inshallah as a way to indirectly say no. It should not be used that way, but it is being abused in this culture because of the indirectness style of communication. And so when I came first to this country, I was dealing with expats who are non-Arab, non-Muslims. So I was saying, inshallah, I'll come. And she says, no, please don't give me the inshallah. Are you coming or are you not coming? And so you have to ascertain the person, understand the person that you are dealing with, if it is coming out from the Islamic perspective or the Islamic context, or it is more with Arab traditions, trying not to be direct and saving your face. Now the other one is mashallah, and there are more words. I'm just sticking to these two. Mashallah is something that the people say when there's something good that happens. My son, the teacher tells me he has 100% in his math test, and I say mashallah, and that is enough. In doing that, I am actually invoking God's protection on my son. I understand that everything good comes from God, and so I'm accepting that blessing, that gift, and I'm invoking God's protection on it. And sometimes people get nervous if non-Muslims don't say mashallah. Now, something also to do with communication is the significance of the right. You must have heard about this also, because it is a little bit well known, is that Arabs, specifically Muslims in general, they eat with the right hand, they write with the right hand, because the left you're supposed to clean yourself with, and so the right hand is used to do these things. and if I want to shake hand, I start from the right. If I want to serve something, I start from the people on my right. If people are entering the door, the ones on my right should enter first, and so on. And so even still in the Gulf area, if you are dealing in the Gulf area with people who are Qataris, do not, for example, take things from them with your left or give them something with your left. Do that with your right hand, otherwise they get insulted. This is a practice of the Prophet, that he used to use the right for these kind of things, and so people just wanted to do that like the Prophet. Now, the other important thing in this area of the world is interaction between the sexes. How do we communicate with the other sex? Now, to do that, I want to draw an analogy. When I was living in Canada and I had my children, when I had my last one, they brought me a little booklet in the hospital, and they said, okay, here in the book, here you put his footprint, here you write some markings if he has, and then here you pull some of his hair and you stick it there. This is a booklet so that in case your child gets abducted or you lose him, and then so to prevent not being able to recognize him again, then you have this booklet. It's a preventative measure. And then my child got into nursery school, and in nursery school there was these skits about a stranger. What does a stranger look like? And what do you do when a stranger comes about? If a lady comes to you at the park and she tells you, please come and help me look for my dog, what do? You jump up and down and you start screaming, stranger, stranger. And they do these skits to help the children know how to behave. This is a preventative measure to prevent abduction. Okay, and it's acceptable and practiced and even taught in that culture. Nobody objects to that. And then by the time, I don't remember, 6 or 7, he's taught about his private parts. What are your private parts? Who can touch and who cannot touch your private parts? This is also a preventative measure in that culture to prevent sexual abuse. Now, all these have been taught to my child before he's 6 and 7 in that culture as preventative measures. Okay, now I want you to carry this analogy and come to this part of the world and look at the measures that I'm going to say now as preventative measures. The same thing about the abduction and the sexual abuse measures. If it doesn't mean that my child is going to be abducted or sexually abused, but people do these measures as a preventative measure. And in this culture, what I'm going to discuss now doesn't mean anything bad is going to happen, but people use these measures in interacting with the opposite sex as preventative measures. Now, to prevent. Now, all the people, when they behave based on Islam, they take the rulings from the Holy Book, from the Islamic law, from the Quran. Now, the scholars have found that all the rulings that there are in the Quran are there to preserve and to maintain 5 things for every individual and for the society: preservation of faith, life, intellect, genealogy, and chastity, and wealth. And all the rules that are there to maintain these 5. For example, no stealing. Why? For the preservation of wealth. No usury. Give away from your money. All of these to maintain this preservation of wealth. Now, what I'm going to say, these rules of interaction with the opposite sex are there for the preservation of genealogy and chastity for everyone in the community and for the community at large. The first one is the dress code. The dress code is very important because that's the first thing you see. And so the Muslims want to talk to the person in that body and not be distracted by looking at that body. And so the dress code is very important for both sexes. So certain parts have to be covered and not see-through, and no tight clothing. And so dress code, and it's for the women, it's usually more than the men. But there's also a dress code between women themselves and between men themselves. People should not see each other totally without clothes, even if they are the same sex. So there is no public showers in the swimming pools in Muslim or Islamic practicing countries. And so the dress code is very important, and the rule is the more you're covered, the more you're respected. The less you're covered, the less you're respected, because the less covering would be interpreted according to the context of these people that you don't really care about preservation of genealogy and chastity. And so this is a campaign that was put forward maybe a year ago by one of the Qatari ladies, and there's another, I think it was another one by another lady in the United Arab Emirates. These are citizens who are getting frustrated with all the influx of people who are not helping them preserve the genealogy and chastity of their community. So these are the no dress code for men and women that people should not dress when they are in the Gulf, in these Muslim countries. And she is saying, remember this, you are one of us. The campaign is called One of Us. And so if you remember the circles that I talked to you about, And so one of these things about the circles is, okay, I am not from these circles, I am not a Muslim, I'm not an Arab, so I'm way out in the outer circles. If you want to come inside these circles, and you want the people to trust you, and you want to have a better relationship with them, then you have to show that you care. You have to show that you understand the culture, and that you reciprocate with them, and you give them you have some responsibility toward them. You give them loyalty. You behave like you are in the inner circles, and that you care. And so they become, there's more trusting then from them towards you, and of course then there's more loyalty to you, there's more responsibility, and so on. But of course there's also more things that you should be wary, since you are inside of the circles now. There's more responsibility, and expect things that are expected from you. Now also, so this is what they're saying. So you've been living in our country, you came, you're sharing the health system, you're sharing educational system, you're eating from the food that we have and everything, and so you are one of us. So you have to help us in maintaining. So this is now your responsibility, because you're inside these circles now. So you have to help us to maintain and preserve genealogy and chastity in our culture. This was also a clipping from the newspaper about also referring to the law here that people should dress modestly, and referring to the campaign. And they actually put at the door of the malls little things saying that people should dress modestly. And there's one thing that was published in the Arabic newspaper. There was a Qatari guy with his family at the grocery store filling his cart and standing at the cashier, and then he found that in front of him there was a guy wearing shorts and tank tops, and he was so uncomfortable. He didn't know what to do, and he said, I just left with my family, left the cart the way it is, because I don't know what to tell my children, what to tell my wife, where should we put our gaze. And this was a problem. And so the dress code is a very important thing. Now, physical touching, I'm not talking about hugging and kissing, although some Arabs hug and kiss people of the opposite sex. But usually I'm talking about shaking hands. Now, there are two rulings here. There's one rule that you can shake hands only in certain circumstances. The other one is it's better not to shake hands. So you don't know who is applying which rule, or some people apply two rules depending on the situation. And so it's better not to put out your hand unless the other person of the opposite sex puts out their hand, and then you can shake. These are preventative measures. It doesn't mean if we shake hands something bad is going to happen, or we're breaking the chastity and genealogy or whatever. But these are, as I said, preventative measures for the preservation of genealogy and chastity for everybody. Now, body language in Islam is very serious kind of body language. There's no flirtation, there's no gazing at the opposite sex, and this can be a problem because some people misinterpret this kind of behavior. If you are talking with a guy and you're a female and he is not looking at you while you're talking with him, in the Western societies this can be interpreted as disrespect. Although native Indians, they do that in all their interactions. They don't look at you in the face as a sign of respect. And this is the same here, but from a different context, is that if you're dealing with the opposite sex, they may not look at you in the face. They might listen to what you're saying. They're seriously listening to you, and they're not being distracted by looking at your body. And so gazing, lowering the gaze, as this guy who was standing at the store at the cashier said, I didn't know where we're going to put our gaze, because this is what you're supposed to do. So all of these fit into complement each other as a one package for the preservation of genealogy and chastity. It doesn't mean anything bad, but it's just a preventative measure. Now, the front and back, and the media always has their time with this front and back kind of thing, is the men at the mosque, they're at the front and they throw the women at the back, so they're superior and the women are oppressed and inferior in that culture. This is wrong, because you're not looking at it in the context that it was created. If you go to a classroom, is the teacher putting superior kids at the front and inferior kids at the back? She has her own criteria for seating the students based on certain goals that she's trying to achieve, and this is the same thing. You can't have prayers and we're focusing on God, and then people are bending over and putting their head on the floor and all of these movements, and putting the women at the front. Seriously, it has to serve the goal. It has nothing to do with being inferior or superior. Even if you go into a lecture hall, you will find sometimes the women sitting at one side. A woman goes in, she sits on the right or left. Then another man comes in, he will sit in the other side of the room. There's nothing on the board saying you sit here, you sit there. You just find people separating because they're more comfortable that way, and it helps them to maintain the other measures. How am I going to lower the gaze if I have men all around me, or women if they have if they have women, men if they have women all around them? So all these measures have to complement each other. We cannot ask people to lower their gaze and then we put them beside each other and expect them also not to physically touch each other. And so everything has to complement the other as measurements for the preservation. Okay, and it doesn't mean anything bad is going to happen. The same thing doesn't mean my child is going to be abducted if I maintain these preventative measures. They are just preventative measures, but everybody accepts them and everybody follows them. Now the last one is male female alone, is that one male and one female should not be in a situation, in a place that is closed, nobody can see or hear them. And so it's better to have somebody else also with you, or have the door open, or have a window, or have something. And so I was giving this presentation to an international school, and 2 weeks later one of the teacher comes to me and says, it really helped me because I was in a situation where I was teaching high school boys, and the bell rang, and then one of the students was asking me something, and the other students were leaving the room, and he started getting uncomfortable, and I didn't understand why. And then after I heard this presentation, I went back and talked to him, and he said, and I said, I'm sorry, I didn't understand that was making you uncomfortable and so on. And then he smiled and was very relieved and said, thank you very much for coming and talking to me about this, and I knew that you didn't have an idea at that time. And so this is also something else that one should be wary of. All of these are preventative measures that are expected and practiced in this culture. Okay, now what about the use of time and space? Now, from the Arabic Islamic perspective, now life is a gift of time. From the moment we're born till we die, this gift of time is only given value if it is spent mindful of God. If I'm sleeping and I'm sleeping with being mindful that I'm going to sleep to rest my body, so to please God, or I'm going to cook this for my children to please God or something, then this time is actually counted for. It has value. If I don't have that in mind, that time is like stolen from me, and it doesn't have value. Now, collectivist cultures, the Arab world, is polychronic in their use of time, and they do more than one thing at a time, but that does not happen during prayer times or Friday noon prayer, especially for men. That is the time you don't want to have meetings because nobody's going to answer the phone or do anything. That is a monochronic use of time. Also, the prayer times, there are 5 prayers a day. They go back a little bit or forward according to the season, according to the movement of the sun, and so it moves a little bit, but they're 5 times prayers. Now, if you're more in a conservative culture, then people want to pray and they want even to go to the mosque to pray. So I would advise not to schedule meetings around that times, because they won't show up, or they will show up late, or they will leave after half an hour because the time for prayer came. They're not going to raise their hand and say, okay, I'm sorry, I have to go do my prayers now. They will start leaving and you won't understand why they're leaving. And so you have to take into consideration prayer times before you set up a meeting. Now there is, I just want to say one more thing. There's allowed time and preferred time. The more I am a Muslim, I want to be a better Muslim, the more I want to pray in the preferred time. So let's say noon prayer is 12, afternoon prayer is 3. Okay, the allowed time for noon prayer is between 2 and just before 3, before the call for the afternoon. So I have these 3 hours I can pray noon. It is allowed time. The preferred time is half an hour, like 12:30 I should be praying noon. That is the preferred time after the call for prayer. And so people vary. Some people don't pray, except they pray at the end of the day. They pray all 5, or they don't pray at all, or as I said, depends where they are on that range. But it is advisable, because you don't know if that person is praying, you can't ask him. So it's better to take these times into consideration. Of course, the breaking of the fast time is also monochronic, because you cannot delay the breaking of the fast. And although sometimes it's not Ramadan, people fast in Ramadan, yes, but also you can find people fasting not in Ramadan. Either they're making up for breaking the fast in Ramadan if they were traveling or if they were sick, or they can be voluntary fasting every Mondays and Thursdays, or the 3 days in the middle of the lunar month that people voluntarily fast. So you have to also be now, what about the use of time in dealings with the Arabs and Muslim culture? I was teaching at one of the universities here, and I had students. I was teaching them Islamic culture, and I had people from different ethnic and religious backgrounds. And so I asked them, how many of you use a calendar? And this wasn't that far away back. It was maybe 4 years ago. And then they said, and we are now in 2013, and so they said, all of the non-Arabs raised their hands. Only 2 of the Arabs raised hands, and one said, when I'm outside my country, outside Qatar, then I use a calendar. And the lady said, I only use it to write birth dates. And so this is okay. You have to look at it as it depends on the culture. The collectivist cultures are cultures that they know all the time what's happening with people who they have relationship with. They know their stories, they know their news, they know what's happening, and the invitations are always asking about, are you going there, are you coming, it's happening here. So they all know what's going through the grapevine all the time. So that's why the Qatari guy said, I only use it when I'm outside my grapevine. I'm not in Qatar anymore. I have to deal with other people. They have their own systems, and so he has to use it. But in Qatar, he doesn't need it. And so when I said, if I want to invite you to a wedding, how many days in advance do I have to tell you? He said, 3-4 days. And for the women, 2 weeks. And I said, what if I told you a month in advance? He started laughing. He said, it'll slip off my mind. And so this is unheard of in more individualistic cultures, where you have to give months in advance, a year in advance. You have to tell people to put it in their schedule. And so we have to deal with the culture according to what works in that culture. And so another story about this is that when I also was giving talks to international schools, one of the principals of the school was saying, she wanted to have meetings with parents who are Qataris, with the staff and with the administration. So she said, okay, we'll meet every 3rd Wednesday of the month, put it in your calendars. And very few people showed up. Now the conclusion was, Qatari parents don't care about the education of their children, which is of course not true. And so what happened is that later on, as with other organizations, they started employing the services of the SMS system. And so they SMSed parents 2 days before the meetings, and they had lots of people showing up there. So we have to use the proper technology, the proper way of communication that works within that culture. Now also sharing is different. In some cultures, the 3 of us are sharing this pie. Okay, we'll split it into 3 pieces. Sharing within the collectivist cultures might be everybody's eating from their plate, and I may not be eating a lot because I want to leave the rest for the people. I am generous and I want to let them eat, and maybe I won't eat at all, or just pretend to eat, so I leave the rest for them. So even that concept of sharing is different, and it affects other things. Actually, when we talk in others, when I will record other recordings about the education system, I'll explain how this also affects cheating, which is sometimes considered sharing. Now, the power distance. I don't want to dwell too much here, but I just want to say that one of the Arabic sociologists, Al-Wardi, his name is, and he studied the Bedouin Iraqis. He said, okay, the Arabs are generous and courageous and all these things, but if I want to add just one more thing that really distinguishes or very high in the Arabs, is they like to have the upper hand. They do not like to have the lower hand in any kind of interaction. So if I'm a buyer and a seller, they want to be the buyer. They don't want to be the one who wants to sell his stuff. If I'm asking or answering questions, I want to be the one answering the question because I have the upper hand now. If I want to give a gift or receive a gift, I'll be the one giving the gift, and so on. So in any situation, the Arabs want to have the upper hand. In the Bedouin structure, okay, we accept a sheikh, we accepted a head for the tribe, but that head of the tribe has to show respect, has to share the loot. We have to have benefit from this head. and otherwise they separate into sub-tribes. And so any kind of person on the top, or like for example the father of a family, the teacher of a classroom, the doctor in a clinic, all these, he has the upper hand, and he is in a position of power. So he has to show respect. He has to show respect and care that these people who are coming and they are at the lower end, he has to show them that it's not bad to be at the lower end, and just like sort of hide that. For example, if I have a teacher or somebody who's coming to my house to fix something, in the Arab world, of course I have to pay him. But in the Arab world, I don't just give him the money and he counts it. It doesn't work that way. Okay? I, for example, put the money in the palm of my hand, or my husband puts the money in the palm of his hand, and then he shakes the hand of the guy and he says, "Thank you very much for doing this." And then, of course, the other guy takes the money and he doesn't count it. Okay? Now, if I'm giving it to him, I'm showing him, okay, you are on the receiving end and I have the upper hand and I'm the one who's giving you the money. And that is not, I'm not saving his face this way. So this is not, you can do it, but if you don't respect the person, then you would do it. And of course, if he takes out the money and he starts counting, he's also showing that he's on the lower, having the lower hand, and he's also showing distrust, and he's not saving my face when he counts the money, and so on. And so these things have to be taken care of, and also strength is really valued in the boss or in anybody to show a strong character. And the education thing, I will discuss this and elaborate on it. Now we have this finished the second part. Now we go to the third part, which we'll go quickly over, is how all of these 4 dimensions come out in a hospital setting in the Gulf world. And I just summarized them in these points. So this is the last slide. Now, illness and treatment. Illness is looked at that it's a trial and a test from God. And so some people might misunderstand that too, even Muslims themselves, and they delay seeking treatment, although it is a test, but God also tells us to go seek treatment. But it is looked at that way. And also, you have to be careful if you're a doctor, if the disease that you're telling that person that he has, if there's a stigma related to that disease in his community and his culture, then that person doesn't want to have that disease, and he may reject you and say that you're a bad doctor, and of course he'll spread that with all his social circles. And this is how people in collectivist cultures decide how to go to which doctor and so on. It's depending on the experience of their social circles, the community experience. Is that doctor good? And it doesn't have to be sometimes with his qualifications. It might have to do something with other points that we will be discussing. His mannerism, his the way they perceive his care, the way he value their sickness, and so on, as we will see. So it doesn't have to be just what university he graduated from and that he has so many publications or he is so good in this and that. Effect on the family, treatment. If the disease you're telling me, you're offering me a treatment, and this treatment is affecting negatively, having a negative effect on my family, then I may not opt for that treatment. I might opt for another treatment that cause less hardship. So the decisions, a lot of time the decisions is not based on necessarily what is the best for me. Because it's a collectivist culture and they have to take care of me, so I have to also weigh that into consideration. Now, also privacy and modesty. We talked about exposing parts of the body and the dress code and all of that. Now, this also applies if we, in the case of teacher, doctor, patient. But in necessity, you do expose whatever part of the body needed in cause of necessity for people of opposite sex. But not necessarily all the body has to be exposed just to see one part of it. So certain parts are exposed based on the need, and not to everybody in the room has to see it. That's something else as well. And also there should be somebody else if it's not a really very private part. The mother has to be there, or something has to be there in the room. The prognosis, it is said in papers that they studied Arab patients, and they said that this was, I think, written in the US, and they said that the prognosis in the US treatment is given to the patient himself if he's an American, But if he is of Arab descent, they usually give the prognosis, it's better to give it to the family, because the family is the one who's going to take care of the patient. And sometimes they don't even want to tell the patients because it affects his morale. Usually Arabs do not like to they don't like to be the bearers of bad news. They don't like to give bad news. And so on. Sometimes even Arab doctors don't give the proper diagnosis because they don't want to tell the bad news to the patient. They treat them, but they don't tell them sometimes what is wrong. Power distance. And so power distance, the doctor is in the position of power, and so the people are going to the doctor are having the lower hand. And so having the lower hand, I expect you to save my face and give me big medicine. Okay, so I go and tell you I have a sore throat. You don't tell me go gargle. And I understand in Western cultures, you go there and they don't give you the antibiotic unless they do a swab and they culture it, and then there's bacteria, and so they give you an antibiotic. So you go, she tells you, looks you, oh, it could be this, could be that. Okay, why don't you just gargle and then drink some hot fluids, take some vitamin C, whatever, and then we'll see what the culture result is. And then if you need antibiotic, I'll give you some. And so, but in the Arab world, if I go tell you I have a sore throat and you tell me, okay, go gargle, that doesn't work. This actually, you have insulted me in a way. And so you have to, but of course, I'm not telling you to give them antibiotic when they don't need antibiotic, but what you have to do is you have to go around this. They are coming to you with the lower hand. So as I'm saying, like you shake the hands and you put the money in it, and then so the people don't know that they are on the receiving end and stuff like that. You have to do the same. You have to establish that bond of trust, and you have to show that you care, and you have to explain to them and showing, okay, we're going to do this. I understand it hurts you a lot and this, and I appreciate that you're coming here, and all of that. And so we're going to do this in a number of steps. The first step, is so you have to explain it and give attention and all of that. And then they will say, okay. Otherwise, if you just go there and just say, okay, go gargle, and that's it. And then they'll say you're a bad doctor. You're not a good doctor. You don't understand what you're doing, and that will spread in all of the social circles. And so that is something that need to be taken care of and observed. Now, there was a study done about doing business in the Arab world. They compared German business people with Gulf business people, and they found, okay, they all want to have business relationships built on trust. But what the difference was that the Arabs expected the Germans business people to spend more time in building the relationship, because Arabs don't do business with companies. They do business with people, and they have to establish that relationship with that person first. Sometimes I read some stories also about business, is that the business goes down if the German company or the foreign company changes the representative. And of course the Arabs are not going to tell them that, but sometimes they stop the contract because they don't know this new person and they have trusted the other one. And so you have to build that bond of trust. If you're a doctor and if you're not an Arab and you're not a Muslim and you're so from the outside circles, you have to work on your social skills. You have to work on your building that bond of trust. So there was also another publication in one of the papers that said, if you're working with Arab people, if it's a nurse or if it's a physiotherapist, it's better not to change them, because it takes time to build that bond of trust, and then when you change it, you have to build it again, and so they may not accept the treatment, or they may not trust you, or they may not listen. They'll tell you, yes, I'll do it, but they won't do it, okay, or they'll not take the medicine, or whatever. Now, visitors also, the Arabs are very generous, and then they want to receive their guests, and they want to serve them, they want to take care of them, and so they might redecorate the room and have lots of food and have people to serve the food and whatever, that they change the place, because it is a requirement. If my friend or anybody I know is sick, then this is their right on me that I have to go visit, or at least use the phone. It's also from the Islamic perspective. This is their right. And so you'll have lots of people trying to come and see them and check how they're doing and so on. If it is my mother, then you'll find, for example, people before work seeing their mother in the hospital. After work, they'll come by and stop and see their mother after work, and so on. So visitors also, it's the way they treat the hospital setting, not like that it's a hospital. And so these are some of the things that I pointed out, just to give you some idea about the different cultural dimensions and how they can actually manifest themselves differently in the observable part of the culture. Now, so I'm hoping that this will give you some skills in order to analyze different cultural situations and hopefully minimize any misunderstandings that might arise. And these are some of the references that I have used and I found useful. It's good to go back to some of them, and some of them are blog pages. And I have some extra recordings to elaborate on some of the points, and they are shorter recordings and they're on YouTube. Thank you very much.